Everybody, welcome. Thanks for being here. So as you're coming in, I know we have many of you joining us, so make sure that you put your name in the chat and the chapter that you're representing today. We'd love to just know who's in the room. I think, Karen, we have all 15 chapters represented.
We do.
Awesome. Hi, Kay. Yay.
Yeah.
Holly's here. Sherry's here from Atlanta. Hi, Jill. Thanks for being here. We'll give a few minutes for people to get in, and then Karen will do sort of a welcome and we'll jump right in. But we want to make sure we get, I think we have about 90, 85 potentially.
At
Yes.
90.
Awesome. Wendy's from Honolulu. Aloha. Mahalo for being here. Hi, Lauren in Seattle. Jackie from Orange County, Minnesota is represented. Hi, Barb.
Chat.
Missy. Vanetta Kelly from Chicago, my old hometown. Yay. So happy to see everyone here. We've got about 40, so we'll get another minute or so, and then I think we can get started, and hopefully people will have people enter their chat as we go. Did I miss? Jennifer Gill, are you here yet? Do I see you in there? Amy Tucker from Colorado. Yay. Hi, Nancy. Welcome. Good to see you in here. Not really see you, but see you in the room. So Karen, let's get started. Why don't we start and kind of we can welcome people as they come in.
Okay, that sounds great. First of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. As you know, we have a chapter support committee that's a subcommittee under council advisors. And we've been working the last couple of years trying to find ways to support the chapters. And we thought to begin with, we would talk about fundraising. So we were connected with Rebecca, and all of us on the team met with her several times. And we were really excited to invite her to join us today. So, Rebecca, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's really, really good to see everybody. As Karen said, my name is Rebecca. I go by Becca Zanata, and I live here in Walla Walla, Washington. So I am in Southeast Washington, and I have been an ARCS fan for a long time. So I started my fundraising career at Washington State University. Go Cougs, calling alumni and parents asking for money. And that's when I realized that that was like a job. You could actually do that work. So I spent time working for WSU as a major gift officer. And during that time, I worked with ARC's Seattle chapter and got to meet many women from that chapter and was really grateful for the impact that they made in our WSU community with science and technology, engineering, and math, and other components of the work that they did. Got to host them in Pullman and take them on tours. And so when a mutual friend that Karen and I have connected us to get to know ARCS a little bit more and put this series of trainings together, I said, yes, of course. So um, I told you a little bit about my first philanthropic job. I also have been an executive director. I've been a director of development. I've been a major gift officer. I am a board member, so I'm currently the chair of the Alpha Phi Foundation Board, which is my sorority from college. And so I wear these different hats when I share the information and the work that you'll see today. And so ultimately, what I really want out of all of this is for you to feel really good about fundraising and really good about your work in it. I love to travel. I'm a proclaimed fundraising nerd. I read what I can. I want people to know fundraising as a game of relationships and a game of fun. And also that fundraising is not a solo sport, which means if you are here by yourself, we want to make sure that you have friends around in this work. And ultimately, many of you are managed by volunteers. And so, what does it look like to show up as a volunteer and give back through philanthropy? So we will use the chat, and if we'll also have the Q&A function, and we'll be managing that. I've got content to share, but ultimately, if there's questions that come up along the way, please do share. I've been consulting for 14 years, and I have worked with a lot of clients in this space. I do most of my work working with boards and board governance and fundraising. I work in campaigns, so capital campaigns, endowment campaigns, and then individual giving and major gifts. So figuring out who the right people are to solicit, helping you figure out the strategy to solicit those donors, and ultimately thinking about this work from a real holistic place of ultimately philanthropy, the word means love of humankind. And so when we're talking about philanthropy and we're talking about giving, we're talking about love. And today we're talking specifically about the love of arts and the love of science and the love of higher education. And so I am happy to see people still putting their names in the chat and know that we have 15 chapters represented here today. So just really excited to have you all here. And so please continue to introduce yourself as you come into the chat, and just know that we are going to have a lot of fun today, and everything will be shared. The slides will be shared. I'll be mentioning some articles. Those will be shared. Working on that follow-up you'll get tomorrow. So just know that you can take all the notes. You also, hopefully you got the handout. And so the handout is something that I want you to use as we go. Part of one of the reasons I share that handout is for us to think about the work as we do it. And so writing some notes down, and whether it's an aha that you might have, or if it's something that you may have a question that you want to ask somebody else about, that's what I want you to use that handout for. I also give you that handout because my hope is you can take this session and take it to another group. So maybe it's your board group, or maybe it's your fundraising team, or whoever, it's your membership, whoever it might be that you can take the workshop and the information from, as well as this will be on YouTube, and it'll be a private YouTube link. So you'll be able to share that as well. So with that, let's get moving. So as we think about today, I want to share with you, as Karen mentioned, I've been working with the chapter support team, fantastic group of women, and talking about the needs of ARCs. And fundraising is always changing. Fundraising is never easy. Fundraising takes a lot of time. I approach fundraising from a very realistic, since I've been there, place, knowing that some of the things I'm going to ask you to think about and do are difficult and they take time. I'm also asking you to think about those things because they work, and taking more time in fundraising to do certain things works. And so as we think about this series that we've put together, we're together today talking about the story, and the story that actually inspires giving. And when we think about giving, we think about what are we raising money for, right? And so I know there's an ARCS national chapter. I know we have the 15 chapters. There's a very similar topic of what you're raising money for, but there's something unique about Northern California. There's something unique about Utah. There's something unique about Seattle. And so what's the story that we're telling? We also want to talk about how we're raising the money. We're talking about who we're raising the money from. And so today's session is really to lay that groundwork for the story that will inspire giving. Then we planned it so we had about a month for you to go away and yourself, and you find your others who are either here with you today or others that couldn't be here today but want to be part of that team, to talk about story to strategy, so inspiring the giving. And so ultimately in that session on June 15th, It'll be a little bit more of a working session, and we're going to plan to look at some of the key messages, some of the stories that you've put together. We want to share and we want to learn from each other. I'll share a little bit today. There's a template outline that we'll talk about that's part of your handout at the bottom. And then there's some other samples that we can talk about and share so that you kind of get an idea for what we're trying to look for on the 15th. Now, it doesn't need to be polished. It doesn't need to be in Canva. It doesn't need to be perfect, but the type of things that we're going to talk about for that will be today. Then in September 16th, we're going to do year-end giving. That is not out yet. These are more save the dates. And then ARCS will send the registration link as they did for this a little bit later. But I wanted you to know and sort of see that the chapter support team has put together sort of a thoughtful, together we've worked on a thoughtful series. So in September, we're getting it ready for year-end giving. October, November, December are the three busiest giving months of the year. It's when people are the most philanthropic. It's often when organizations raise the most money. Very specifically, the three busiest giving days of the year are December 29th, 30th, and 31st. So how are we, through our ARCS chapters, making sure we're getting ready for year-end giving? And then October 14th, something similar. We'll go from giving to launch. And so between that September 16th and October 14th, give you an opportunity to put together the plan. What does it look like? What is the story you're going to tell? Who are you going to ask for? And then in January 27, can't believe we're already talking about 2027, but we'll start with a session on sort of taking from the year end to the next. And then in March, we have another session, but it's to be determined. So ultimately, I know that chapter support team asks you often, what do you need help with in fundraising? You're going to receive a simple survey after tomorrow in the follow-up email asking another question, but we're saving that March 2027 to pick a topic that's most relevant to most of you. And we'll just know that we're open and flexible, and that the goal for the whole series is to, at the end, to leave you better than you were when you started, or at least to confirm the things that you're already doing. Because I know many of your chapters are doing great. And so other thing I want to make sure is that we're sharing with each other. So yes, I'm leading these sessions, but the reality is there is a lot of knowledge in the room. There are some amazing volunteers who have fundraising experience and other board experience that I want to make sure that we're leveraging that as well. So as things come up, as questions, please use the chat. We'll take some time if you need to come off mute, that's fine as well. But we built this session to be 90 minutes. If you can stay for the whole 90 minutes, that's amazing. We want to make sure that you have time to ask questions and time to share. So with that, we'll keep going. So another chat moment. How do you feel about fundraising today? So you woke up, of course, thinking about fundraising. So in the chat, tell me a word. How do you feel about fundraising today? Wary, encouraged, oh my gosh, expectant, intimidated, positive, cautious, good. Something I have to do, but I'm not excited about. I appreciate that, Beth. Overwhelmed, barriers, untrained, challenged. All really good words. Good, positive, competitive, encouraged. What else? How are you feeling about fundraising today? Curious. I like that, Christina. Competition. Yep, excited to learn more. Okay, so yes, all of these things. Hopeful that AI will help us. Ingrid, I think it can. It can definitely be our friend. It can definitely be a tool. It is never going to replace the relationship base, and it is never going to replace the human component of fundraising. But like you said, it can definitely help us. Tough times, lost. Okay, so my hope is as we move through this conversation, it is never ending. You are not wrong, Wendy. That we move through this conversation, that maybe you move to a different place in the conversation, and maybe you're still lost and it's never going to end, Wendy. So it is going to be never ending. But my hope is that there's some tools and some conversations we can have today that help you think through your fundraising plan. So right now it's really difficult. I have two sessions coming up in person where we're talking about the way we have to think differently about fundraising right now. And what I mean by that is I started my career in 2000. So we know what happened in 2001. Then in 2008, 2009, we had a recession. And then we had 2020 with the pandemic. And now we're in just an uncertain times with less federal funding, tax changes, the competitive nature of fundraising. So I just want to acknowledge that it is not easy. It is competitive. And so ultimately there are things that can set you ahead and there are things that will help you raise more money, but those factors externally are real. And so I think acknowledging that you are not alone, acknowledging that fundraising is difficult, and also that people want to give resources away. People want to volunteer. People want to give back. There is an inherent sense of generosity in humans. And so ultimately, what we're trying to do is provide that through ARCs for people to give back. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate the honesty and I want to keep moving along. So when we're thinking about fundraising, you've got to have a vision, right? Donors give to organizations that have a vision of where they're going. And so, what is your vision? What is your organizational vision? Now, again, as we're talking here, you have an ARCS national organization and you have your chapter. I think it's important to tell both stories, right? But when you're thinking about your vision for the organization and the impact you want to have in the community, that's what I want you to think about or be able to articulate. So, we're gonna have a little bit of exercise. We'll talk about some things to articulate a vision. But you got to have vision because if you don't have a vision, that is that what people will give to. And it doesn't have to be, I mean, it doesn't have to be um, unique. It has to be unique to your organization and it has to be clear. You also need a case statement. A case statement is just a fancy term for a story to tell of your organization, and it's a way for you to practice the different stories in which you're telling people about your organization. So at the bottom of your handout is a case statement outline, and we're going to reference it a little bit today. And I'm looking over here because I have some of the handouts over here that I'm going to reference. But you'll see the key components of a case statement that we will walk through a little bit later. Then there's the board, right? I believe the board is an extension of whatever staff you have. If that's volunteer staff, if that's one staff, if that's no staff, then the board is an extension of your vision. And the board is critical to achieving the vision and telling the story. And so we need to make sure that we're engaging the board effectively in engaging donors. And there are different ways in which we can engage board members. And ultimately, it's not all in the same way. In fact, one of the things we're looking about when we're thinking about volunteers and the board and fundraising is that the ultimate what we used to say was everybody needs to do everything, and that just doesn't work, right? As organizations grow, as they evolve, ultimately what we're learning is everybody needs to do something. And I'm even committed to the organizations that I work with, and I would encourage you that everybody needs to do something and that it's in line with the gifts that those people bring to an organization. So everybody has gifts. Everybody has things that they're good at. Some of us are really good at talking to people and sharing the vision. Some of us are really good at just kind of being behind the scenes, making the connection and bringing people close. Some of us are good at making the ask. And then some of us are good at saying thank you and sharing the impact. And so ultimately, what we need to remember is that we need to match those gifts and what we need in fundraising to our board. Because what I never want to do is set a board member up to fail and set a board member up to do something that they're not comfortable with. Because the umbrella of fundraising is big enough that everybody can do something. So, vision, case statement, board engagement. Those are three components that we'll be talking about a little bit more in detail today. So, the key element of vision. So my question, and this is on your handout, it's the first thing, there's a few questions at the top, which we'll get to in a little bit. But the first exercise is, what's your $1 million idea? So I want you to think about and maybe write down, and I'll give you just a minute or so, but I want you to think about, if you had $1 million that someone gifted you tomorrow, what would you do with that $1 million? And I asked this because there's a story. Did not happen to me. This is something that I heard someone tell this story, that there was two organizations, and there was a board member who was a board member of their organization, and they went and sat down with their executive director and said, "What would you do with $1 million?" And the executive director looked at them and didn't have an idea and couldn't articulate what they would do. So that board member of that organization goes to other organization that they're not on the board for. And they sit down with that executive director and they say, "What would you do with $1 million?" That executive director articulated what they could do with $1 million. So who do you think that board member gave that gift to? The organization that could articulate it, which ended up being the organization they were not serving on the board of. So I'm sharing this with you to say, you got to dream big. You got to think about what you would do and fill in the blank. If it was $250,000, if it was $500,000, if it was $1 million, what would you do? So share a few things in the chat with me. What would you do? What is your $1 million idea? As you're typing in the chat, don't sell yourself short. Fund 5 endowed awards. Awesome, Carol. So if someone came to you, you would say we would fund, and we don't talk about the why yet. We're just kind of talking about the what. What is your $1 million idea? Because then of course, as the fundraiser, Carol, I go to, okay, what are they going to be for? Who are they going to benefit? But that comes later. Wendy says to invest and support scholars in perpetuity. Excellent. Chandra says she'll support more scholars. Secure a revenue stream for infrastructure to grow chapter capacity. I love that, Laura. It's that whole concept of putting your mask on first before you help others, right? So helping your organization become sustainable so you can help others. I love that. Jacqueline says hire a top-notch full-time staff that could collaborate. Hire consultants like Rebecca to work with the staff and the board. Fantastic, Jacqueline. We're going to help you get that $1 million, because yes, having full-time staff or even part-time staff really helps, because most of you volunteers. And when you're a volunteer, life gets in the way. That's just the way that it is, right? So if you can build into the infrastructure some type of staff support, that helps a lot. Double the amounts that we give to scholars. Awesome. Hire an ED and fund more National Scholar Awards. I love it. Fund 25 scholars. Put part towards hiring support and staff. Set up a sustainability endowment to cover operating expenses. Awesome. Okay. So that's your $1 million idea. That's where the dream starts. Because someone will at some point potentially come to you and say, "I have this gift. What are you going to do with it?" And what we need to be able to do is be prepared, and we need to be unabashed about what we're going to do and say, "This is what we're going to do. And you're going to help me do it." For National Endow a salary for the ED. Awesome, Nancy. Christina says, create an endowment challenge campaign fund for matched fund for sustained commitment for X number of scholars. I love that. So take that gift and leverage it to get more money. Or just with a client this morning, we were talking about matching gifts. Matching gifts, $5,000, $10,000, $1 million. Somebody in the room just feels great, because the reality is their $100 is now potentially $200, however the match is set up. But I love that, Christina, of taking something and then using it to grow and expand further. Awesome. Okay, so who else needs to be part of this conversation? Take this exercise back and see how many $1 million ideas you can come up with. See where the similarity is, see where the difference is. But the idea with this is to come up with many ideas. And are we going to achieve them all at the same time? No. But are we going to kind of put them in a list of maybe a priority order? Fantastic. And so ultimately, what I will want you to do is to be thinking about all these things as to like, if we had the $1 million, when we have the $1 million, this will happen. This is another exercise that I want you to think about is what are you first at? What are you only at? And what are you best at? So I do a lot of strategic planning with organizations. And I believe both in planning, but also both in fundraising, that you need to come from a position of strength. What are you good at? And so this exercise to me is an exercise where you're really looking at what are we first at? What are we only at? And what are we best at? So for as an organization, my guess is you are the first ARCs in your organization, or in your state or in your region. You might be the only organization that funds science and research in higher education. You might be the best at bringing volunteers and people together in your community about the topic of science. What is it? And so think about that for a second, and you can put it in the chat. What are you first at? What are you best at? And what are you only at? And I think, Jacqueline, yes, we are going to be able to capture the chat. And so we'll work on that. So thank you for asking that question. What are you first at? What are you only at? And what are you best at? And don't get lost in the like, there might be another organization that does. There might be. But I want you to really own why you are great at what you do. And so thinking about that lens, first, only, best. So like hear you typing, because then all of a sudden it just like floods. And then there's just like a lot of answers. And pick whichever. You don't have to pick all three. You're first at recognizing the need to support PhD candidates. Yep. Thanks, Laura. Unrestricted private funding for doctoral students in STEM. Excellent. Thanks, Nancy. And so as you're thinking about these things that you're great at, again, this is where we start the story, right? This is where we start the case. Come from a place of abundance versus scarcity. Come from a place of where you're great, not of where you are still challenged. And we all are still challenged, but come from a place of greatness. See what I knew it was going to happen. The only ones supporting grad students in STEM. Missy says the best at giving unrestricted grants to early grad students. Holly says the ARCS is the first and only organization that was started by and is operating by women to support college students in STEM. Love that. Community-based philanthropy. ARCS is the only and or best for provided unrestricted funding. Yes. Christina says best at catalyzing STEM, loving women into cheering for doctoral students' work and seeing what they do during the funded research. Awesome. And Diana says best to support STEM scholars and both financially and emotionally. Okay, look at the chat. Why would I not want to support your organization? Right? Now, there's more to pulling this together. But what I love about this is it just gets you thinking about all the things and the reasons why you need to be thinking from this place of abundance. And this is another activity. I want you to go back to your board, back to your fundraising committee, whoever that might be. Again, fundraising is not a solo sport. Who's going to be part of your team? It may be just 3 people. I think that's fine. It just can't be by yourself. So ask this question. And again, you're probably going to come up with multiple firsts, multiple onlys, multiple bests. And that's good. That's what I want you to be thinking about. Okay, so we're going to keep going. So this is kind of how I think about fundraising flow, right? When we're thinking about why fundraising is so important. And part of this session, I know I'm going to give you a lot of information. And I know what I want you to really think about is that you don't have to do it all. It's more educational, it's more inspirational, And then I want you to be thinking about, that's why the worksheet's there, is to kind of think about the few things that you can take away and work on now. And then in the future, you can attack other things. So fundraising starts with a strategic plan. Where's the organization going? And so when we're thinking about where our organization is going, that includes the vision, that includes the mission, that includes our values, that includes our goals, our strategies, and our tactics. Now, different words, people use different words, but ultimately that strategic plan is where we're going. Donors like to see that. They like to know that there's a plan. They like to know that you have thought about where the organization is going to be in 3 years and 5 years. What I will tell you is that in strategic planning, I used to do a lot of 5-year plans. I don't do that very much anymore because the world changes so quickly. And so ultimately, I think of plans as like 18 months to 3 years. Now, some people tell me that's not strategic. Well, I think that ultimately you just got to have a direction of where you're going. Now, if you go back to those $1 million ideas, that could be your vision. That could be where you're headed. Now, we got to figure out how we're going to get there. But this idea is that we're building a strategic plan that includes a vision for where the organization is going. I want to go back to Lori says for San Diego chapter, we're the first and only organization to name and honor a local scientist of the year. I love that. It's fantastic. It's a really good way to bring publicity and to share the mission. So then you need to have your vision, right? In your plan. What is the organization aspiring to do in the world? Why do we exist? And vision is the dreamy statement. Vision is the gulp statement. If you achieved your vision, you will have accomplished what you set out to do. Then the mission is the purpose. What is our purpose? And the mission is help us achieve the vision. What about the values? What are our core priorities? And I could go back and look in this chat and think that there's education is a value. Community is a value. What are the different values of the organization? And I think, you probably have these. I know ARC National probably does as well, but I think it's important to just talk about what our core priorities are. Because again, as we're thinking about fundraising, if we have this $1 million idea, this vision, and we have these values as to how we live and breathe and do our work, if we have these first, only, and bests, this is all part of the story. It's a bit disparate at this point, but the idea is to try to get things up and out and reasons why people would give to you. Then you're going to have a development plan. And that is how the organization is going to raise the funds to serve the mission. One of the things that I'm going to include in the follow-up for you is components of a good development plan. But what I'll say is that the development plan is something that should be thought out before the year happens. So fiscal year, if it's July to June, if it's calendar year, it's ultimately a calendar of ways in which we're going to raise critical funds to serve the mission. And oftentimes, development plan can sit alongside the communication plan, right? Because development and communications, marketing, the three sort of external ways in which we're communicating, go well together. And so when we're thinking about the development plan, one of the things that I want you to think about is you have your events. This year, my hope is you're going to have some type of appeal at the end of the year. You probably have times where you're going out and individually talking to people. You probably have corporate sponsorships that you're going and asking people to either give you a gift as a corporation or sponsor your event. You probably also have potentially foundations, local foundations, either family foundations or other local foundations that might support your mission. So when I'm thinking about the development plan, those are the components that I'm talking about. And again, there'll be a handout that I send that is inclusive of all these thoughts. And it includes things like, how are you going to acquire new donors? What does that look like? And again, this is the moment where in this plan, it takes time, it takes people, it takes energy. And what you may do this year is have your event and an end of year appeal, and that's okay. And if you really go-getters and you have people that really want to get on board, you might think about a corporate or a business giving plan. But I'm giving you this information to think about the fact that having some type of development plan, calendar year or 12-month plan, that is how you're going to raise critical funds. And then, of course, part of the fundraising flow is your budget, because your budget tells the story of your organization through numbers. And I can tell you by looking at an organization what they value. Do they value professional development? Do they value staff? Do they value travel? Do they value collateral? Like, looking at your budget as a visual representation of your organization is something to think about. If you're not investing in fundraising somewhere, how is fundraising going to grow? So what does it look like to put fundraising in the budget? Is it looking for part-time staff? Is it budgeting for a postcard appeal? Is it budgeting for somebody to come support you to build out a social media campaign? What is it? But making sure that the budget is a way in which we're telling the story of the organization. I'm going to stop here. Questions, thoughts? We've kind of covered the million idea, dollar idea. We've covered the first, only, best. We started to talk about fundraising flow. Please, in the chat, or if you want to use the Q&A, I'll just pause for a moment if there's any questions about what I've said. Is there a fundraising specific reason why the fund is there? Yes, totally, Catherine. Part of it is that the strategic plan includes the vision and the mission. And so I'm just thinking about from the top, the strategic plan is ultimately the where the organization is going. And then within the strategic plan, Catherine, you have the vision and the mission and the goals and how you're going to get there. But for me, I just think about some sort of plan. And the other word I use sometimes, Catherine, is just strategic direction. Like, where are we going? And ultimately, what that means is that the board and those of us that are setting the stage, the plan, the roadmap, we've sat together and we've decided this is where we're going. And then we'll figure out how we're going to get there. But that's why it's at the top. So hopefully that makes sense. Where does endowment enter the effort? Starting one, maintaining one, deciding what to. That's a great question, Jacqueline. So endowments, that's actually one of the topics that we're thinking about talking about in January, Jacqueline. So just mentally note that. But endowments come into play when you have a solid annual fundraising plan, because ultimately people who give to endowments are people who know you, who love you, who've given to you before. It's very rare in an organization that someone will come out of the woodwork, find you, and make an endowment gift. So ultimately, having a strong annual fund where you're asking people through your development plan regularly to ask to give money. The other component of that, Jacqueline, and this is another piece that we'll talk about in January too, is planned giving. And so thinking about legacy gifts. And I think endowments and planned giving are connected, because oftentimes when someone leaves your organization, leaves your chapter in their estate plan, that's often how some organizations can then start an endowment or add to an endowment. So to me, it's within the development plan. One of the key components that you'll see when I send this to you is planned gifts. Because when we think about planned gifts, there's a very and again, when I think about ARCs, again, I'm an Alpha Phi, women's organizations. We're very philanthropically minded. We're very thinking about the future. And so we're making these decisions. When I'm not here, who am I going to leave this money to? And so we'll do a deeper dive in January talking about plan giving, Jacqueline. But what I'll say is that plan giving and endowment to me are connected. And we should be at least thinking about having that conversation with people, or at least letting people know that we accept plan gifts, so that when they're talking to their attorneys, when they're talking with when they're filling out their beneficiary designations, they know that they can leave us and their estate. So again, we're just touching the surface on that, but hopefully that's a bit of a kind of direction that I would say that's how that's connected. Anything else? We're going to move on and talk a little bit more about the case. So we've talked about vision, so what we're raising money for. So let's talk about the case statement. Now, case statement is jargon language that we use in our sector, the nonprofit sector, to talk about what are we raising money for. So we're taking that vision all those pieces that we just talked about. Now we're putting them into some sort of statement that we can leverage. So Karen, great question. If there are chapters that have development plans we could all share with each other, I would love that. So maybe Karen and I are meeting next week. One of the things we're doing in this series is trying to figure out how we can best learn from each other. And so we're going to have you share key messages and case statements. We're going to have you share development plans. So if as an organization you have a development plan, we will put in the follow-up email the best place to send that. My hope is that there's somewhat of a library that we can create, that at least you have a template or a base that you can start to potentially build a development plan from. And I will make sure you include the components. It's not the actual plan template, but it's the components that you should think about in your development plan. So this comes from a woman that I truly think is fantastic at what she does. Her name is Julia Campbell, and she is works in marketing. And one of the things she talks about is when we're thinking about telling stories, we're thinking about stories from an ethos, a pathos, and a logos. So kind of getting back to Greek, right? And thinking about how we tell our story. So ethos is really about credibility, right? You can, what are the aspects of your story that speak to your credibility? That first, only, best, right? Those speak to your credibility. Ultimately, why should people listen to you? Why should people believe what you're telling us? Because you're connected to a national organization, because your chapter has been around for X amount, because you have amazing philanthropic, smart women and people in your chapter that you that make good decisions. But what is that credibility factor? The other thing that I think is really important is when you're thinking about why you want to think about the idea of that's telling people why they should give to you. The emotional side of things is pathos. So looking beyond things that happened, looking at things that telling a story of something through emotion. So one of your scientists talking, someone earlier mentioned we support them financially and emotionally. So what does that story look like? How are we telling the emotional side of our story? We're using emotion with intention. And then also we're coming from a place of being proud versus guilty. And what I mean by that is just you are proud to ask for money. You're not guilting people into giving. You are proud to ask for money. And so how do we tell the emotional side of our story? The scientist who was able to do X, Y, and Z, or the way in which we're telling our story that is really coming from a place of pride. And then the last part is just the logos part. And so thinking about it, where people are asking questions to engage, the things that people ask you, they're using logic to ask. We're asking people questions. And then we're connecting that to what are the answers that questions they're asking us? What are the answers they're giving us? And from that place is like, hey, we need to have some of those components in our messaging, in our case statement. And then thinking about telling the one story. And what that means is, you support many different students. You have many different students over the years. Thinking about your story from one story. Tell one scientist story in each communication. And maybe it's a couple, but this idea of telling multiple stories, sometimes people get lost in that messaging. And so this idea is kind of have one really great story that communicates what you're really great at and tell that story. And then what is the story vital to understanding the issue? So understanding that the story and the scientist and the giving to the scientist is important because we need to support science and higher education in our country. We need to support cancer research. I mean, the other thing is when you think about all the different sciences that you support through PhD students, there's a huge ripple effect in the work of ARCS. And so, yes, you can think really, really, what's the word I'm looking for? Directly that you are supporting students, but then think about what those students are doing and think about what that's doing. And none of that would have happened without an ARCS scholarship. And so if you think about cancer and other research and the different things that your students are working on, climate change, agriculture research, whatever it might be, the ripple effect from that is huge. So thinking beyond just what giving it to the student, but what the student's going to do with that That's a story to tell as well. So as we're thinking about these, it's just different frames and way to think about stories. But ultimately, when we're thinking about the organization is so us as an organization is should be asking, what impact are we trying to make in the world? That's the question we want to be asking. What is the impact we're trying to make in the world? And whose lives are we impacting? And this is where I really do believe, based on that last little piece, you're impacting way beyond just your students' lives. You're impacting their families, you're impacting their community, and in some cases, some of your students I know from the work I did at WSU are doing research that's going to maybe affect me someday. And so who are the live? And I know that's a difficult sort of a big story to tell, but there's a way to tell that story in a big way. And there's a way to tell that story in a macro way and a micro way, right? And when I'm thinking about that one story, I mean that one student who's working on that one thing, and what is that potentially going to do? Who's that going to impact? And then the donor, and think about yourselves, because I know also many of you are donors to ARCS, but then also other organizations. You're asking, what can I accomplish with my gift? And again, right now, we know people are making choices. We know as donors, maybe you're not giving to all the organizations that you used to. Maybe you're giving to a subset of those just because of resources, because of what's going on in the world. Who knows what the external factor is? But you want to know, what can I accomplish with my gift? Simply, why should I give? Right? Why should I choose you? So again, back to that first only best, back to that unique vision that you have, the mission that you have. That's why I should choose you. All those things that you shared with me, those are the reasons I should choose ARCS to give. And then why should I care? We need to give people a reason to care, right? So we're giving them a reason to care through story. We're giving them a reason to give through both facts and through narrative. So I oftentimes think about storytelling as data and narrative. And so when I'm thinking about the data, that's the number of scholars, the amount of scholars, the number of universities, the sort of the number side of it. And then there's the narrative, the story side. And that is the person who's receiving the gift and telling their story as a connection to ARCS. And so I often think about fundraising as the art, which is that narrative, and the science, which is that data. And so when we're thinking about who we're talking to, sometimes think about yourself. Are you more of a narrative person or are you more of a data person? And depending on the organization, you might be one or the other, and you don't have to just be in one bucket. But the idea is when we're thinking about how we're telling our story, we want to be thinking about that story from a narrative side and from a data side. So, thoughts, reflections, are these the questions? These are the things I want you to be thinking about. And again, as I'm talking, feel free to use the chat. I'll look over. But I want to make sure kind of we're thinking about this. And again, these are the questions. Next board meeting, next volunteer meeting, go back and ask, what impact are we trying to make in the world? We should be able to articulate that. If we can't articulate it, our donors can't articulate it. So what are we trying to impact? That's all part of putting this story together. I'm just pausing for a second if there's anything else people want to. And those two questions are on your worksheet, right? As a reminder. So they're underneath the vision. What impact are we trying to have in the world? And whose lives are we impacting? Those are the questions I want you to go back. When articulating how important is brevity. Oh my gosh, Laura, I'm so glad you asked that question. We like to hear our story way more than other people like to hear our story, right? So I think brevity is good as long as you're telling the full story. And what I would say, Laura, in my experience, what I've always learned is tell the story, tell the story in a way that lands with people. Practice telling it, right? And sometimes then maybe it's the short version and then you click and you go to the long version, right? So that, we live in a 140 character society, right? Let's be honest. Twitter set us up for that, now X or whatever it is, but this idea that we live in that 140 character. I'm not telling you need to be that brief, Laura. But what I'm saying is get to the key components of the story quickly and make sure that the most important pieces are there that leave a person wanting to know more. And then they can find out more from talking to you, they can find out more from your website. But I do think this idea of a bit of brevity and conciseness is important. Yes, as Wendy said, the elevator pitch, right? And everybody's elevator pitch is going to be different. And ultimately, when we're thinking about, and that's we're going to get to that and talk about the key messages and hopefully start to think about that in the idea that you can get in an elevator and go to the top floor, and whether it's 3 floors up or 50 floors up, you can share what ARCS does. Sheila, is it important to keep your case statement to 1 page? So, I'm going to show you one in a little bit at the end. I'm going to click out of this and show you. It's actually 6 or 7 pages. It's got beautiful graphics. I've seen array. I think depending on, again, how much you have to say, you can be either probably in 2, maybe 4 pages. So I also think that you're going to have photos, you might have charts, you might have other data in there along with the actual narrative part. But
Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we may have lost Rebecca for a second, so we're going to give her a couple of minutes to see if she can join once again and get us started back from her ending spot. So just hang tight for a couple of minutes. We're going to see if she's able to join. Looks like we've got Rebecca back, everyone. We'll give her
Mm.
just a second to get settled.
Gosh, y'all, that was, hey, you know what? If you can be flexible in these times, then I don't know what to tell you. So I appreciate the interlude. Hopefully, you all were thinking about some questions, some thoughts. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to jump back in. I'm going to share my slides, and we are going to talk about why people give. So people give for different reasons. So people give, and this is just sort of ranked from, from eight, and you'll see because they're asked. So what I would like you to see here, most importantly, is people give because they're asked. And if you don't ask, you're not going to give. And so I think it's really important when we're thinking about fundraising that yes, there's a business interest, there's religious beliefs, there's all these different things, personal connection to the mission, volunteers for the organization. Volunteers give more than not. We talk about giving as time, talent, treasure, and testimony. And when we're thinking about those different things, we're thinking about the different ways in which people can give, and you're seeing it here. They're volunteering, they're giving back to their community. But ultimately, what you see here is that people want to have impact. So that important reason of what's the impact you want to have in the world, that's really something that I want you to think about. Is that important to know why we're important, where we are in our community? Wendy says it's important to know where our scholars are now, yes, and how their work in there is impacting their community. I think that is a fantastic point, Wendy. And as much as you can, again, maybe not all of your scholars, right? But if you think about a couple scholars a year that you can sort of track over time to see what they're doing in their community and what the impact of that work is, it's a wonderful opportunity to go back and tell people what happened and why they should give again. So these are different stories people like to hear. People like to hear the impact and success. They want to hear good things, right? People are giving because they want to make an impact. And so for us to be able to share success stories, just like you said, Wendy, of the organizations, of the scholars, and making sure that we're sharing that story. That nonprofit news, right? That's about 17%. And that's just kind of when you're thinking about how and this also comes from Julia Campbell. She's done some research sort of on the communications side. The news is just about us as a chapter. People do want to hear about that because again, it's that credibility component of why I should give to you. Upcoming events is about 15% because they want to know when they can learn more about your organization. They want to attend your events. They want to see the benefit of being part of something. And then that campaign goal progress is just, you can relate that to fundraising. So I know sometimes we show a thermometer where we've raised this much money, but the reality is that's kind of important, but not all that important. People really want to hear success stories and they want to hear the news component first. So when we're thinking about messaging, and again, this is in your worksheet, I want you to think about there's going to be your top messages, there's going to be your middle messages, and you're going to be your base messages. I'm trying to keep this really simple in terms of framework, is that our top messages are core message. Why does ARCS exist? ARCS exists because why? There might be more than one reason, but why does ARC exist? The middle is our supporting messages. That's the programs, that's our priorities. That's about the scholarships that we give. That's about where we give the scholarships. That's about who we give the scholarships to. And then there's the base messages. And those are the proof. So that's the stories, that's the data, that's the examples. That's the way I want you to be thinking about this. So when I'm asking you to think about your top messages, your middle messages, and your base messages, this is how I'm wanting you to sort of think through this. Now, if I was working with you all individually, I would probably take this and we just write them on sticky notes, right? And we might do one message per sticky note. And so one of you might lead this as an exercise with your team, whether it's your board, your committee, whoever's going to be excited and join you in this conversation around fundraising. So then you're going to have potentially a bunch of top messages that are going to be core to why ARCS exists. Then you're going to have some middle messages. And what we're doing here is we're building to that actual case statement, right? Because what I really want you to be able to do, and when it comes down to it, The case statement is lovely to have, and we need it for conversations. We need it for our events. We need it for sponsorship conversations, for foundation conversations. But ultimately, people want to know what you do and why you do it. And and then how you do it. And so this is how I want you to be thinking about the messaging component that we're putting together. And again, this is on the handout to help you think through this. So let me just ask the question, why does ARCS exist? What would you say? I'm curious because I bet there's some different answers, and that's not bad. That's great. Because again, we exist for different reasons. But why does ARCS exist? To advance science in the US. Excellent. Thanks, Sue. What else? Advancing science in America. Ditto. Great. What else? Support and encourage young scientists. Fantastic. To provide a better life for all of us, taking it way up there, Beth. That's fantastic. To improve the human condition through advancing science. An economic driver through science. Thank you, Joan. That's really important. Here you go. To solve cancer, to understand the universe. I love that, Missy. To support scholars in a way they aren't otherwise supported. Those are all your core messages, right? To promote science and technology and STEM education for US scholars and support tomorrow's leaders. Fantastic. So these are the things, right? These are the reasons why we exist. And this is really ultimately what we just need to tell people. And then they will give. I promise they will give. So, what are your next steps? So, when we think about this, your next steps, what's your $1 million idea? I want you to take that conversation to another group of people and have that conversation. What is your why? So, what do you need to do next? Who needs to be involved in this conversation? So, I know there's several of you from chapters. Most of you have multiple people here. Maybe this small group talks, and then you figure out how what we learned and share your takeaways, and then you bring a larger group together. But I want you to just think about that intentionally as to what might be next. And then where's your case statement? And so the case statement, again, is at the end of that handout. And ultimately, that's the outline that I want you to work through with a group of people. And I'll share that in a minute. But ultimately, that is how you're going to sort of start to put this story together. And then who's a great writer? Who's a great storyteller and writer as part of your chapter? That's the person I want you to bring into this conversation who can take these different components and then put them into a great story. Because as we're talking, these are the pieces, the messages, these are the pieces that are coming out. And then ultimately, you're going to take that outline and you're going to change that outline into an actual document. Nancy says to help our nation remain scientifically competitive. Excellent. And we exist to ensure that there is a new cadre of next generation of scientific scholars. I love it. Thank you. So, as we move on to talk about the board, I think it's really important to know that the board is an extension of whatever team you have. So, my question for you right now is, how is your board currently involved in fundraising? So, I would just love some comments. How is your board currently involved in fundraising? Assigning the task to a small committee. Okay. So the board actually then is assigning it to a small committee. Okay. Finding sponsors and partners for our annual fundraiser. What else? How else are they involved? Named individuals of sponsorship of scholars. Thanks, Stephanie. And while you're thinking about that, where have you seen the greatest success in engaging your board? Is it through your event? Is it through small event? Is it through sponsorship conversations? But where are you finding the most success? So Carol says you put on one event each year and we all solicit for a silent auction. Great. And it's free to attend. So there's endowed funds. The board is helping with endowed funds. Great. We have a VP of fund development with directors serving under her for foundation giving, member giving, legacy giving, etc. Okay, thanks, Lori. So that's how it's set up. So there's the board member, and then underneath there are different volunteers supporting the fundraising. I think that's really good. Because again, we need someone doing, we don't need everyone doing everything. We need everyone doing something, right? Okay. So when we think about fundraising, this is a cycle that I have used. I went through the Indiana University School of Philanthropy a long time ago, and I love this because what this does is it talks about the relationship with a donor through these three different activities. Ooh, Jacqueline, I love that. Meeting our scholars and talking about their research to form a personal connection to spread to others. That's fantastic. Anytime board can connect with the actual scholarship recipients is fantastic because then they're actually, you're seeing the work in action, and that's what we want to be able to do. So, cultivation is about 60% of the relationship with the donor, okay? And what I mean by that is you're getting to know their values, beliefs, and experiences. So, you're getting to know that they value science, that they value education, that they value PhD programs. So, we're getting to know that they believe in a smarter world and that their experiences, they maybe are married to a scientist or maybe their parent was a scientist, but that's what we're trying to do in the cultivation is just bring people closer to us. And there's no ask, right? But that's when we're sending our newsletters. That's when we might have an event to come and just learn about ARCs. This is what we do, this is why we do it. This is maybe what we do in our membership where we're inviting people to learn more about what we do. Then the solicitation is the ask, and that's about 10%. And so that's either done through an ask that's personal, that's email, that's a letter, that's a postcard, whatever vehicle that might be, that's when we make the ask. And then the stewardship piece is where we're saying thank you. And that's where we're sharing the impact of the gift. And so what you'll know, really sort of see here is that 90% of fundraising, as the way I think about it, there's no ask. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is think about in our own chapter, what are the different activities that we do in cultivation? What are the different activities we do in solicitation? And what are the different activities we do in stewardship? And then asking board members to sign up for where they most feel comfortable. So I do this exercise a lot with boards, and I sort of think through this idea of cultivation and list the activities. And then the solicitation, of course, is pretty clear. And then the stewardship is more after the gift is made, sharing the impact. And then I ask boards to rank what are you first most comfortable, second most comfortable, and least most comfortable. Couple things there. One, we actually know where you want to be, and so we can then create tasks for you to be there. And number two, it gives us an opportunity to see where we need to maybe recruit some board members or some volunteers. We need some more askers, or we need some more stewardship. But this idea is thinking about this circle of fundraising. So when we're thinking about fundraising, these are some different ways in which board activities that I'd like to see boards do. You can make phone calls. You can, and some of these are things that you shared, the stewardship of prospects. So writing thank you notes. After that one event that you do, Carol, making sure that everybody comes together and you do a thankathon together in a room, or you're all independently doing it from 5 to 6 p.m. and calling and saying thank you to the people that came to the event. You're attending major donor events, so you're having small events too where people are getting to know each other, they're getting to know the mission. And then, of course, the board needs to 100% give to the organization because if the board doesn't give, then why should a donor give? And I think where I've seen this change and evolve over time is it's more about participation and engagement than it is about amounts. Now, I still see organizations that have minimum amounts, but ultimately it's really most important that people give so that we can actually say as a talking point that 100% of our board has given to our chapter. Identifying corporate contacts. And again, some of this is not the ask, some of this is just the brainstorming. So these are the activities in which the board can be involved. And I saw some chatter potentially about the idea of a philanthropic community. And so ultimately, that idea of bringing, and there's some conversation about salons, but just sort of smaller donor events where you're bringing people together to talk about things more intimately than at your big, large event. And there's a way to share what you do. Maybe you have one of your scholars there. There's an opportunity for them to speak, but there's a way where people can kind of learn in a smaller group about the organization. So this is a great place. Another place to start for the board is really, again, asking for that board participation, making sure that you have clear expectations around what fundraising is. I don't think none of us really grow up to be a fundraiser. This has been my career for 30 plus years, but oftentimes people don't know what it means. And I will tell you that in this new way of volunteering and board service, we need to be really clear with people about what it means. So, what expectations do we have around fundraising? You will, in going back to this list, are some of these the things that are going to show up and what we're actually expecting people to do? We should look at a skills analysis of our board. Do we have cultivators, solicitors, and stewardship? Do we have people who are marketing backgrounds? Do we have someone who has a finance background? Do we have someone who has a fundraising background? But thinking about that from a skills analysis, clearly having training and workshops and practicing it. I'm doing a session in 2 weeks with the board, and we're going to actually, in the Zoom room, split up into groups, and we're going to ask each other. We're going to practice. I know another organization that recently someone was willing to say, look, I've never made an ask. And so what they're doing in their next board meeting is actually one of the board members was ready to be asked and said that. And the person who said, "Oh, I've never done this," they're going to do a live solicitation together in front of the board so you can actually see how it's done. And you know what? How it's done is really depending on you and your style. But ultimately, also incorporating fundraising into board meetings. And what I mean by that is if there's thank you notes to be written, if there's phone calls to be made, if there's brainstorming on who we need to have at our tables, if there's a brainstorming of who we're going to ask to be sponsors, if there's brainstorming of who we need to ask for silent auction items, but putting that into board meetings so that outside of the board meetings, you're back to your volunteer, you're back to your life, right? And so making sure that the board meetings that we're committed to ARCs in that moment, that we're involving these fundraising asks and activities in the board meeting. Collect and talk about stories and messaging always. Start with mission moments. Start with the thing that brought you into the organization. Everybody should know why they're there. Sometimes it's because Karen asked me. Sometimes it's because I saw science affect something and I wanted to give back to that. But everybody should know their own origin story, which is sort of the start of that elevator pitch. It all starts with you. I oftentimes say that there's the organizational story and there's your story. And I want you to have both because your story is very important because people give to people. And so if you can talk about why you give and people will give to you through the organization. And then allow the board to see themselves in the fundraising plan so that there is a section for the board to make asks, to make thank you notes, to host events, so that you see how important it is for the board to be included. And then to understand that really it's more than just money. We want to look at retention and making sure people are coming and giving again. We want to make sure that looking at donor behaviors, that they're out telling the stories, that they're inviting people to give. And so ultimately that it is more than just money because we want to be connected with an organization in more than different ways. And so in the end, and then we have 15 minutes for some questions and I'll share a few things, is we're putting it all together. We're looking at connections, we're looking at relationships, we're looking at fundraising from all these different lenses. And ultimately, I want you to be thinking about one next step. I don't want you to think about the five next steps, but I want you to think about the one next step. And so, as we think about this, this is really the end of the slideshow component. And so, I'm looking at the chat, and I also want to ask Sarah Ann how we want to ask questions. But I know there were some questions for each other. There's maybe some questions for me. Lori's saying, are we differentiating between board meetings and general meetings, luncheons that occur quarterly with our members? That's a great question, Lori. I would say yes. So to me, where the board is meeting regularly, to have the fundraising strategy and the involvement be at that meeting. And then you may want to include members and an activity of fundraising in that quarterly meeting. But I think most importantly, what I'm sort of thinking about is that the subset of the board, let me just say this. You can have a philanthropy committee, sort of a smaller group. You could, whatever you want to call it. The board's role of an organization is duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. And what those things generally mean is that you're taking care of the health of the organization. And so what I want you to be thinking about in those smaller meetings is how are we prioritizing fundraising? How are we prioritizing our story and our messages so that we then are taking that to the members and to to people, prospective members, and telling them about who we are and what we do. So feel free, yes, as Sarah Ann's saying, does that make sense? Great. Okay, thanks. But one thing though, Lori, I just want to make sure, because I've seen this happen, is when the board abdicates their role of fundraising to a committee, it has to be both, right? It has to be both because the board is got to make sure that there are resources for the organization. And one of the ways they might do that is to create a fundraising committee or a philanthropy committee, but they also have to pay attention to it. So while questions might be coming in, I'm also going to share the example of, so first of all, let me share this as questions are coming in. I do want to just highlight, 'cause some of you I know weren't able to see it, but I want to show you that there's space for the messaging, there's space for the board, there's a space for your action plan, and then down here, this is that outline. And it's comprehensive, right? And again, it is not meant to be something that you do by yourself, and it's not meant for something that's going to happen in one sitting. It's a conversation, and this is why we put sort of a month together between these two sessions. The follow-up being session being June 15th, is for you to think about what is your opening? Do you have your vision? What is your mission? A bit of history about the organization to build that credibility piece. What are the specific programs that you do, the awards that you give, the actions that you take in your community? What are your outcomes and your impact? And then what are our needs? We want to have 5 more scholarships. This is what it costs. This is what we're trying to do. So some financial ask in there. The different ways in which people can support. There's a community benefit section. And then there's just a little bit of a checklist. So giving you some ways to sort of just think about this from the aspect of, not all of that might end up in your document, but the conversation, sometimes I learned this from a mentor that the process is more important than the outcome. And so sometimes the process for our board or our fundraising committee is to go through this process because what happens at the end is you have a better story, you have messages, and you have things that you can go out and communicate to others. Questions in the chat? How to continue to grow our board as we mostly retired and aging? Great question, Wendy. Affects board health. Younger folks don't always have time to volunteer. Oh my gosh, there's so much in that question, Wendy. And I just want to say this. I'm glad you're asking it because organizations with aging board members have to be asking this. So, some things to think about. I study a lot underneath the umbrella of generational giving. And so I think that what we know right now is that the boomer generation is really beginning to retire. I'm solid Gen X and I'm working and raising a family. The millennials are in the same, they're career building, but it doesn't mean that people aren't giving, first of all, and it doesn't mean that people aren't volunteering. And so what I would say is just thinking about, when do you have your meetings? Are they in the middle of the day on a Thursday? Maybe a person who's working can't get there. So do you have a virtual option? Is there a younger or a youth board that maybe you're bringing along, a youth committee? There's organizations that are looking at that. The other thing, Wendy, is to think about, the board is different than the different places where people can volunteer. So I know you have a membership committee, you might have a finance committee, but what do your committee structures look like? And how are recruiting potentially younger folks to serve on those committees? Because ultimately the goal would be that those committee members would then serve on the board at some point. And so creating sort of a pipeline of engagement and just looking at when we're meeting, how we're offering our meetings. And the other thing is just making sure that we're asking. So looking at the people who come to your events, looking at the people that are showing up, and just saying, it's great to be recognized. Hey, I saw you at our event. Is this something we're looking for people to sit on our board, or we're looking for people to, serve on this committee, and just asking people to consider it. But a lot of it is going to have to do with when we meet and how we meet, and that might be something you have to adjust a little bit, or at least think about how that fits in. So hopefully that's helpful. Francis, thanks for sharing. Atlanta's instituted a hybrid meeting and having some board meetings at the end of the day to accommodate professional. That's fantastic. So I love that, Francis, because this idea of traditional monthly meetings, I'm seeing going away. And what I'm seeing, Francis, is what you're saying is like a meeting virtually, maybe a meeting at the end of the day, maybe it's a morning meeting, but it's clear and there's a calendar, but there's different ways in which people can show up, which I think is good. Can you expand on the board duties of care, loyalty, and obedience? I can, Jacqueline. What I'm going to do, because it's not right at the top of my head, but I will include a link in the follow-up that goes into each of those. But ultimately, when you look it up, it really talks about care, meaning you're watching the budget, you're watching the financials, you're asking financial questions, you're regular reviewing financial statements. Loyalty is making sure that there's no personal conflict of interest, making sure you're putting the organization before our personal needs. And then obedience is similar. And so I will include a link, Jacqueline, that will have some more information in that for sure. Other questions, other thoughts? Can you talk a little about seeking corporate support? I will definitely do that, Ingrid. Our chapter struggles to make headway here, particularly if we don't have personal connection. Um, gosh. So one thing that I will say that I often think about is that individuals are the greatest growing group of donors for any organization. Then you have foundations and you have corporations and you have the government sector. The thing that's important to remember is that behind foundations and behind corporations, there's people, right, that are making those gifts and making those decisions. So if you don't have those personal connections, it can be really hard, right? And so what I would say is oftentimes I've worked with organizations to do some sort of network mapping exercise. And so if you're looking at some of the corporations or the small businesses in your community and just sort of putting them up old school, whiteboard, butcher paper, flip chart, and just listing them out and then asking your board or people to put their name next to who they might know or at least be able to open a door to. So sometimes it's just a network mapping exercise that starts to lift up who the corporations are, who the businesses are. But I will tell you that cold calling is really difficult. And so I would, like anything, I would start really small. And even if there's two or three that you have relationships with and talking to those two or three, I would do that approach for just sort of the cold call approach. So unfortunately, I think that one of the things with corporations that I would say is really important is that corporations are looking at you just as much as you're looking at them, if that makes sense, right? And so you're looking for values alignment, you're looking for potential program alignment. And so when you're thinking about things from that aspect, sometimes just going into a meeting where the person might become a corporate donor and just having a conversation about what they value and what is of interest to them. Maybe they want to have a flyer at your event. Maybe they want to have a logo on your social media. Maybe they want to put a logo in your newsletter. And so just be thinking about corporate sponsors and support broader than just money. What does marketing support look like? What does sponsorship support look like? And so thinking about that as a broader conversation potentially. Let's see here. Yes, so we will be sending a questionnaire that'll be sent. And then we would love for you to join us in June because that we'll be sharing sort of want you to bring some of your key messages, your case statement drafts, what's worked, what hasn't worked, that type of thing. A resource that identifies corporations or foundations who have mission alignment with ARCs. So, Francis, there's a engine called Foundation Directory Online, FDO, Foundation Directory Online. They have a free version, and then oftentimes local libraries have the paid version, and you can go in and actually look up parts of your mission to see if there are foundations or corporations that would align. So I would say Foundation Directory Online is the one I would use. There's also Grant Watch. There's a couple others, and so I can include those too because I think that would be great resources. I want to share with you really quick as we're kind of wrapping up. This is a case statement that is actually the organization I serve on the board for, and it is still in draft format. So please don't tell anyone. And if you're an Alpha Phi, you're seeing it for the first time. So hopefully, maybe you'll make a gift. This is our document, and you can see here it's our 70th year. So it starts with a letter. And I'm going to include this in the follow-up. So I just more showing it to you, just sort of who is going to be our new chair. And then these are our funding priorities. So leadership and wellness. And then there's a quote. So using quotes from your scholars. There's some good images. Then heart health is another one of our second funding priority. So there's a little information about who our recipients of our awards were. And again, another quote. Scholarships is the third. So some information about scholarships and what we've given. And then Forget Me Not. And that's our fund to support sisters in need. And there's a quote from a recipient who actually received a Forget Me Not. Then heritage is our fifth and last priority. And then this is the Ivy Fund, which we've branded as our annual fund. So we're asking people to give to this. We include plan giving because we want to make sure people are thinking about that. So we talk about different ways you can make plan gifts. So the question earlier about a one pager, this is 12 pages, right? This is long. But what you'll know is from this, you will see some of this show up in different places as one page or one section. And so what I often think about is as you're building this document, you're thinking about it as the holistic document that ultimately you can take pieces out of it and have one pagers for programs. But, again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. As long as you're being communicative about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and why it's important, and you're following some of these questions and answering some of these questions, you're doing a great job. Rita, Candid's good too. Candid is definitely a research site. I've used it to find different 990s of organizations. So the other thing you can do, Rita, is you can look at like organizations' websites. I think this is totally fair. And you can look to see who their corporate sponsors are and who their foundation donors are. And those could be ways in which you then find names of people that you can find if you have a connection to them. And so I think that that's another source is finding like organizations and seeing who supports them, especially in the corporate and the foundation areas. You're welcome, Holly. You're welcome, Jill. It's 1:30. I want to start on time and end on time. Thank you for your patience in the middle as we had our glitch. Um, Stay tuned for a follow-up email. Stay tuned for a bit of direction on what to bring to the June 15th. But just know that this is an iterative process, and we want to be helpful. The chapter support team is also here to help you. And so Karen and I are going to be talking next week about the different ways we can continue to do this in a way that's not just one and done, that we're building on this over time. So I'll stay here for a second as we close out, but if there's any last questions, I'm happy to answer them. You're welcome. And hopefully this sparks more questions too. Sometimes it sparks more questions, and I want you to share those questions with us because then we can help answer them or we can find the answer to them for you. Thanks, Jacqueline. I'm happy. I hope you do that, right? Take this. Beth, we will figure that out. Karen, let's figure that out the best way to share our questions between sessions. Does that
Okay.
sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yes.
Yeah. So Beth, we'll TBD on the best way to do that, but just jot them down for now. As I tell all my clients, start your Becca list or start your ARCS question list, and we'll figure out the best way to help answer those. You're welcome. So Sarah Ann, feel free. I don't know if you want to let it end or if you want to stop it, but whatever you want to do.
We can go ahead and end it here. Becca,
Okay.
thank you so much. We will have a follow-up email for anyone who's still hanging out. So be on the lookout for that to be in your inbox in the next couple of days. But any questions in between, you all can also reach out to Karen or ASG, and we'll make sure we get those to Becca as well. But we will see you all again on June 15th.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of
Great
your
one.
day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.